Tell me what you're drinking, we can go pour one. Tell me what you're thinking, we can have some more fun.
Yeah. So Levi, what's your presentation about? What's the project you've been working on? And if you want, you can just take the mic and start educating us, because I'm sure we're gonna have some questions.
Yeah, sure. Let's get right into it. So I started to share my screen. Can you guys see this?
Yep, we're
Yeah.
locked in.
Okay.
I'm tapped in.
So the title of our paper is called "The Carrot and the Stick: Cleaning Up PED Use in Minor League Baseball." And again, I just want to stress that this is joint work with my co-author Scott Brave. Um, and I also want to just preface that these are all personal opinions, and like the views expressed in the paper are just they don't actually represent the institutions that we work at. And so, with that being said, let's just dive right into the presentation and the paper itself. So today's presentation, it's going to follow a very standard format where we'll first motivate, what we're talking about. We'll then dive into the actual game theoretic model and formalize that model. And then finally, we'll get into results. And I also have these appendix slides just to help me answer questions that you guys may have or questions that might come up. And so kind of the first thing I want to do before kind of diving into everything is taking a moment to kind of celebrate the fact that MLB's joint drug prevention and treatment program is almost 2 decades old. 2, 3 decades ago, there was a huge problem with PED use in Major League Baseball. And since the implementation of the program, it's been a clear success, as there's been like very few now Major League Baseball players suspended for PED use. But kind of like despite these improvements in the program, it's always been like less clear in how successful this has been in preventing drug use at the minor league level until very recently. So back in March of 2020, a terrible month, I might add, my co-author Scott presented preliminary research, a working paper at SABR that essentially linked pay structure of minor league baseball with PED use.
And when
And
you're talking, sorry, not to jump in, but when you say PED, you're specifically meaning performance enhancing drugs?
yes,
Okay, cool.
and essentially the main argument that Scott wrote down was that at the margins for each minor league level, there are essentially large pecuniary gains in your wages from increasing a level. And because of this, there's a huge incentive for PED use to take account for PED use across all levels. And so just to kind of like visualize this, in blue here, we have for each of the 4 minor league levels, the the percentage share of PEDs as a share of the roster spots. And then in red here, we have the expected pay increase from a promotion to the next level. And so because both of these follow a U-shaped pattern, you can see that there's this clear correlation between PED suspensions, which is our proxy for PED use, and then the expected pay increase from promotion. So essentially the idea is just that people are using PEDs is to get the extra wage promotion in the minor leagues. There we go. And so with this clear pattern, it suggested in the old minor league baseball, so pre-COVID, that a possible way to reduce PED use was essentially just adjusting the pay curve. Fast forwarding now to, post-COVID era, the 2022 and 2023 seasons have seen significant changes throughout minor league baseball, particularly as it pertains to their base wages. Their wages are now higher, just nominally, and also they're flatter in that the percentage increase in salary you get from getting promoted to one level is less than it used to be. And I also should be noted that there's been quite a big decline across this period in minor league suspensions. And this is even taking into account the fact that minor league baseball has contracted quite a bit since COVID. There are just less teams, and as a result, less roster spots. And so basically we want to test, we have empirical evidence that this correlation exists and we more so want to formalize this. And so, with this being said, I kind of already alluded to what our research questions are, but we write down 2 research questions. First, we ask, are these 2 developments between minor league baseball pay and PED suspensions still linked as we thought they were, pre-COVID? And also, what implications does this have for future PED use in minor league baseball? To answer these questions and how the rest of this presentation is going to go, we're first going to formalize and calibrate a game theoretic model of how the league can alter incentives faced by the marginal PED using player at each level through what we call carrot and stick type policies. Just as like a little preview, carrot type policies are going to be those policies that are positive incentives, i.e. in this case, it's going to be through wages. And then stick type policies are going to be through things like suspensions and essentially altering the probability that people who use PEDs get promoted to the next level. And so through this structural model, we show that both the level and the slope of the pay curve is still very important for minor league PED use. And so kind of the way we're thinking about this is still very important in spite of the fact that minor league baseball has changed a ton. I should also note that the pay is not the only things that have changed quite a bit in minor league baseball since COVID. There's also a lot more different like benefits for minor league players. So for example, they have like housing stipends now, where before they really were kind of like up to their own devices, or they were sharing rooms with up to like 4 or 5 other players. And there's also there was a collective bargaining agreement for the first time signed for minor league players last year. So there's really like a big reason to think that this, it's not necessarily obvious that these things are still linked today. And so finally, the last thing we show is that the model predicts the decline in PED use for 2022 and the 2023 seasons quite well. And so just as a quick preview of results, I won't get too into this right now. In red, we actually have the actual number of PED suspensions for the average 2022 to 2023 seasons. And then in blue, we have what our model predicts. And as you can see, it gets the average between 2022 and 2023 quite well. Now, of course, there's some over and under predicting individually in the seasons, but we'll kind of get into that when we actually dive into these results. But first, let's kind of go into writing down this formal model. Now, before I go on to the next couple slides, I just want to warn you guys, it's very notation heavy, but I just want to kind of preface that this model really is just a simple cost benefit analysis. It's taking, expected returns and expected costs and just evaluating them from the league and the player's perspective. So let's first look at formalizing what that means from the player's perspective. And so first we're going to try and formalize the expected returns or expected benefits to PED use from the player's perspective. And so in our model, we're first just going to start with the fact that players are going to choose to use PEDs or not. Now, why do players use PEDs? Players are using PEDs, obviously, to alter their transition probabilities, or in like normal people saying, they're just trying to get to the next level. And so kind of a way that we can mathematically model this is simply take the difference in transition probabilities, which are through this probability matrix, in the probability that you're promoted to the next level utilizing PEDs minus the probability that you're promoted without utilizing PEDs. Now, of course, if you do get promoted to the next level, that's associated with a higher salary. And so that's what that pay increase we highlight through this delta W. And so the expected benefits to PED use can be written down right here. Now, of course, from the player's perspective, utilizing PEDs doesn't come at a cost. There's health costs, but more importantly, and what we actually formalize, there's costs in terms of lost salary. And so if you're caught, you're going to lose your salary WN for a fraction of the season's games, so their suspension length being SN. Now, players are going to have different views on the probabilities that they get suspended. what I think, what my personal views on the probability of my getting suspended if I utilize PEDs would probably be very different compared to what Ant's used on his likelihood of being suspended for using PEDs. And so we're going to capture these differences through this row term. And so because of this variation between all the player level variation in their suspension beliefs, row N, this adds player level and league level variation in the expected cost of PED use, which is simply the suspension beliefs times the suspension length times the current wage that you would lose if you were to be suspended. And so when we finally formalize this, as I said, it's simply just looking at costs and benefits. From the player's perspective, all they want to do is maximize the expected benefits from PED use less the expected cost of PED use. And so what this simplifies down to is what we call the net expected return to PED use. This is simply just taking the probability matrix and kind of actually writing down like what this means. And so for the players who choose PEDs, it's simply going to be when their net expected returns to PED use are positive. So when this is greater than 0. Now we can go to the league side. So from the league's perspective, in a perfect world, the league would be able to test everybody at all points of time where everybody's suspension beliefs would be 100%, right? But the league cannot possibly do that. It's too costly and it would require way too much manpower. And so this creates what we call an incentive compatibility constraint, where the league is simply going to choose an acceptable margin of PED use, where in equilibrium, they'll make their choice variables such that the net expected returns in equilibrium to PED use are 0. Now, how is the league going to achieve this? Through its choice of the suspension lengths and also the salary schedules. Now, in our model, we're going to take the transition probabilities and suspension lengths as given. And so what I want you to take away from this is all the league and all we're moving around in this model, all we're changing are the salary determinants. So what is the nominal salaries and what is the change in salary from being promoted to the next level? That's all we're changing. And so when we formalize the league's problem, the league has this min-max problem where simply they just want to minimize the player's problem, which is minimizing the net expected returns to PED use, which again, as I said in the last slide, is going to reduce to incentive compatibility, where in equilibrium, they set the net expected returns to PED use to 0, where this row star identifies those equilibrium returns, the row star highlights the equilibrium suspension beliefs, or the suspension beliefs of the player whose expected benefits to PED use are equal to the expected cost of PED use. Now, that might not make a lot of sense, but I hope that the next slide will kind of clear this up. So in equilibrium, when we solve the model, simply what we're going to do here is, if I go back really quickly, we're simply going to move the expected cost to the right here by adding the expected costs and then divide by WN. And from here, we can get what's called the marginal willingness to pay for BEDs. The marginal willingness to pay for BEDs is where the expected percentage loss in salary from PED use is going to be equal to the expected percentage gain in salary from PED use. Now, what does this mean? This is highlighting the costs and benefits to PED use for the marginal PED using player. The marginal PED using player is the player who is completely indifferent to utilizing PEDs, right? Because their expected percentage loss is equal to their expected percentage gain in salary from PED use, so they don't care if they use PEDs or not. Now, everybody else's suspension beliefs relative to this row star is what's going to determine PED use in the league. And so for players who have suspension beliefs that are less than the suspension beliefs of the equilibrium player, their net expected returns to PED use are positive, and as a result, they're going to use PEDs. And so essentially, we're just highlighting from the league's perspective how they can change the suspension beliefs of the marginal PED using player by changing these two variables right here. In other words, just the wage determinants. And so really what we're hoping to highlight are the two policy levers that the league has in essentially trying to deter PED use, what we call the carrots and the sticks. Again, the carrots being the wage determinants or the pay curve, and the sticks being the transition probabilities and suspension lengths. Now, early PED policies really focused on the sticks, where throughout the last 2 decades, suspension lengths have just grown and grown. But we've really kind of hit the point where the marginal returns in increasing suspension lengths are decreasing. So the league's not necessarily ready to just keep increasing suspension lengths, because they've kind of already reaped the benefits in terms of PED deterrence from doing this. And so what we're kind of positing, and what Scott posited 4 years ago, was that the next kind of logical thing to do was look at the minor league pay curve. And so I kind of want to just take the sticks as given and kind of, again, highlight, the key implication for our carrot policies. Now, again, this is the same equation we were looking at before, which is just simply the marginal willingness to pay for PEDs for the marginal PED using player, where, again, their expected percentage gain loss in salary for using PEDs is equal to their expected percentage gain in salary for using PEDs. Now, what are the implications, specifically looking at the delta W term? Now, an increase in the slope of the wage schedule is going to increase the marginal willingness to pay for PEDs. And so when the league is going to increase the wage slope, we're actually going to expect PED use to increase. On the other hand, when the league decreases the slope of the wage schedule, we're going to expect the opposite. We're going to expect PED use to decrease. Now moving to the WN term here, this is just simply level wages. If the level wages go up, that means that the marginal willingness to pay for PEDs goes down. And as a result, we're going to expect PED use to also go down. And then it's just going to be inversed if it's going down. And so given the fact that we have the new 2022 and 2023 wage schedules for minor league baseball, and also because these seasons have already been played, so we know who's been suspended and who hasn't been suspended, we can plug these terms into our model and see how well the model does in predicting PED suspensions. And so before we kind of get into the model predictions, I first want to highlight the minor league baseball pay curves for 2022 and 2023. So in our model, to start, we're going to take the 2015, these black bars. This was the pay schedule in 2015, and we just kind of take that as the baseline. As it turns out, minor league baseball pay really did not change for a very long time before and after 2015. So this is a pretty good baseline. And then in 2022 and 2023, we can see the subsequent increases in salary that the Players Association was able to get. Obviously, in 2022, it was a pretty slight bump. And then in 2023, we see a huge bump across all 3 levels. And so this is just simply highlighting the changes in WN. On the right-hand panel, we can see this is simply now tracking the actual wage curve. And so we index everything to the rookie salary. And so taking the 2015 as baseline, it actually turns out that the 2022 wage curve increased and got worse by a little bit. But as you can see in 2023, they corrected for this by significantly flattening the pay curve. And so what would we predict, just as a naive prediction, for 2022, we would predict a slight decline in PED suspensions. And then for 2023, because we have a massive increase in W and a massive decrease in delta W, we're gonna predict naively a pretty big decrease in suspensions. write down what our actual estimates of both the marginal willingness to pay for PEDs is, and then what also predicted number of PED suspensions is going to be. So on the left-hand side, the first thing I want to kind of mention is how for the marginal willingness to pay for PEDs, we still see this U-shaped curve, which is similar to the U-shaped curve that Scott found 4 years ago. And so really, this kind of is our first inclination that it's probably the case that the correlation and the direction in which he thought that things were going to move are still the case in 2022 and 2023. Of course, another thing to highlight from this is that with the new wage schedules in 2022 and 2023, we see significant reductions in the marginal willingness to pay for PEDs. Reductions in the predicted number of PED suspensions for 2022. And then for 2023, we pretty much predict that there really are only a couple PED suspensions across all levels. Now, again, because these seasons were played, we can go back to this chart, which is actually going to show our actual and predicted number of PED suspensions. And again, I want to highlight, on average, the model gets it quite close, predicting around 13 versus the actual 12 number of PED suspensions over 2022 and 2023 on average. Now, for those, the final couple minutes here, I kind of want to get into some caveats with this model, as I'm sure Lisa and Ant are going to have a lot of caveats they want to add to this.
I thought it was foolproof. Like I thought, just like every good econ model.
Right. So in 2022 and 2023 for the individual years, you guys can obviously see we're over predicting in 2022 and we're under predicting in 2023. And it turns out in 2022, we're over predicting at the highest levels of minor league baseball. And in 2023, we're under predicting at the lowest levels of minor league baseball. And so we do have some caveats to these predictions. But, with any good econ model, if you can get the average over a period of time, that's pretty damn good. And we're pretty damn happy with this, especially considering how drastic these reductions are compared to the 2015 baseline. I think that really needs to be said. There were still quite a large number of PED suspensions in 2015. And the league has really decreased this. A couple other caveats I kind of want to get into before I wrap up here. Of course, with any econ model, something that, somebody can ask is, have we really fully accounted for the costs and benefits of PED use? And the answer, of course, is no. We might not be accounting for all the new subsidies that the players are getting in 2022 and 2023, particularly the housing subsidies. And of course, there are other costs to PED use, not including, your lost salary, specifically like the health costs to using PEDs that we can't necessarily quantify in this sort of model. The last caveat I kind of want to get into is, naively, somebody might listen to this presentation and say, oh, wow, like, look at those numbers. The league has done a great job. They've, pulled all the levers in terms of, maximizing the reduction of PED use in minor league baseball. And I don't necessarily want you guys to take that away from this presentation because kind of one of the key inputs into this model are these transition probabilities. And if these transition probabilities were to shrink, we, of course, would expect a further decline in PED use because players aren't going to use PEDs if they don't expect their probabilities to increase for getting promoted to the next level. However, this obviously is very difficult because in order to do that, it would essentially require teams to apply discounts to the performance of PED using players. And I'm not necessarily sure teams are going to want to do that. They're going to want to promote players as quickly as possible in order to reap the benefits of, their play. And so finally, wrapping up, what have I talked about today and what do I want you guys to take away from this? I hope you guys can take away that this framework is really important in understanding kind of the evaluating the benefits and the cost to PED use. particularly through these carrot and stick type policies. And then finally, I want to highlight how important the changes in the wage curve are, particularly higher wages and narrower wages in decreasing PED use. And yeah, that's my presentation. Go Cubs.
Sell out from Tampa. No, I mean I've got questions. I don't know if you can hear me. My mic's still working.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
Yeah,
we can hear you.
I definitely have some questions on top of my head. But I know Lisa, if you want to
Go
give
for
it
it.
the
No,
first
no, no.
whack.
Go, you start. You start because I had some, but they were pretty immediately answered by the caveats, my first few questions. So
Well,
you start us off.
so 2015 being the baseline, I guess one of the questions I thought was, you said that the pay hadn't changed a lot since 2015, but you might have said this in the presentation too, and I just missed it. Has the suspensions changed? Like have they increased suspensions since 2015? Because I feel like they might have. And did you guys account for that as well?
Yeah, so absolutely, like the suspension lengths have probably changed across all levels since 2015. And I believe we took the average suspension length at each level from like 2005 to 2018. Because it's a static model and it's only 2 periods. So we're not like looking at this over a period of time. We can only do our best in, putting those inputs in. And so we thought that essentially taking an average in the suspension lengths over a period of time would hopefully accurately capture that.
Yeah, and does that also answer? Because I also had the thought too, just with I think the way MLB works. I don't know if it's the same with minor league baseball, but like I think on your second offense and your third offense, the penalties get increasingly worse for the player if they're suspended for PED use. That's just you just take the average of all of those as well, I guess.
Yeah, I believe so.
All right, that makes sense.
To be honest, I'd have to like look at the appendix of our paper because I don't remember.
Yeah.
But I just know that for a lot of these things, we do essentially average out like the inputs over because like the data that we calibrate this model to is over the course of almost those 2 decades. And so really, because so much has changed across those 2 decades, kind of the best you can do is just taking the average over that time period. But I will also caveat that I don't think as much has changed at the minor league level as at the major league level.
And yeah, you're probably right with that. Just thinking if it has changed, it's maybe changed like not as much as what a pay increase would probably affect someone's, someone's
and also
need to.
And also, I
take
should
PEDs.
say like if the right, like we are capturing like the costs, I think, pretty well.
Yeah. And then the other question I thought was, I'm all for paying minor league players. I think everyone should go get that bag. But if I'm MLB, right, I'm going to probably take out of my wallet in my pocket, like after I've exhausted all extremes on the other side. Do you think MLB would just, you showed that formula and it had kind of the wage aspect part and then also the penalty of suspension as well. Do you think the league would just ever rip the Band-Aid off and just go straight to the extreme and I guess say like you're banned for life if you get caught with PEDs? Like that would be the extreme. No, but I'm saying, you get what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah, but no way.
No, but
yeah, I'm not Levi,
like,
but no way.
it'd be like, how cheap are they to where, instead of raising wages, I'm just going to raise the penalty until I can't anymore, which you kind of said they kind of have like gotten it to a point where.
So yeah, I think one, I really think so. My first thought is like, there's no way they'll do that just because like they still want these players to succeed and like get to the next level. Because like people get suspended for PED substances who aren't necessarily even trying to cheat. Like there are examples of players who like are on medication to try and like who are trying to like have children and have a family and stuff. And like, they might be saying that just to get good graces with the media, but I buy that some players like accidentally are caught with PED substances and are not like trying to actually increase their performance. But then, so that's my first thing, is that I just think that no. And then the second thing, which I think is more important, is just that kind of this idea that the league is kind of maximized, particularly the suspension lengths, really. And I think and I think in our model, like we have kind of played around with that input, and really like there's just such decreasing returns to increasing the suspension lengths. Because if you think about it, dude, like I think the first like suspension, you're already losing like half the season.
Yeah, I think it's like 50,
And that's a
60
lot of
games.
money.
Yeah, something.
And you also have to think about it for these guys who are making $20,000-$30,000 a year, like they can't afford to be losing that. So yeah.
Makes sense. Those are like the two biggest things for me where I was like, huh. Like just it's not so much that like I'm trying to disprove, it's more so that like I want to see, to me it's like a puzzle, and I want to see like where different pieces might fit, and what levers you can pull to try to maybe get like a different result or something like that.
And like 100%, like that is kind of like what we hope people take away from this is like, okay, given we understand better like the incentives and disincentives that the league can kind of use as inputs for these players, like those are the exact questions that we kind of hope that front offices will use when evaluating their own like policies.
Sweet. See,
So I'm more interested. You say that PED use basically has a higher probability of getting promoted to the next level. I'm assuming there's like research on how you arrived at that. And then also, I guess my question, assuming that you do have that, would be, how do you know that that is true? Because then would that not imply that players have to essentially admit that they're using PEDs, which they would be disincentivized to do?
So like within the model, we use what's called nearest neighbor multivariate distance matching.
Oh yeah. Heard of that one.
Fancy.
I've heard of that.
Obviously, you know what? I get it.
No.
Totally, that's all you need to say.
So essentially what we do is we match the minor league player profiles that we take from like Baseball Reference over the seasons from 2005 to 2018, where we take all sorts of inputs such as like height, weight, performance, position. We're trying to essentially create two of the exact same players over that time period. The only difference between them is one got suspended for PED use and one did not. And utilizing that, and because this time period is between like 2005 and 2018, we can actually see for the rest of their careers if and when they got promoted and demoted. We end up matching 227 of the full, and so let me go back for a second. There's 419 suspensions over that time period. And so the maximum number of players that we could match is 419. And given how specific we have to get in order to match these like player profiles, we end up matching over half, which is actually like really good. And it's really just a testament to the fact that there's so many damn minor league baseball players out there. And so that is how the transition probabilities or the transition matrices are determined. In our paper, we actually show like what the transition probabilities look like. I just didn't have time to show them. But essentially, it just is a matrix of the 4 different leagues. And then it takes each of those players and it says, okay, within this sample period, where did they get promoted or demoted? And we have so each of the rows will add to 1 because probabilities can go over 1. And so we know that essentially like we tested on data through like this matching algorithm that we use.
Makes sense. Now, did you find that steroids did help people get promoted?
So it's actually like kind of mixed. I honestly would have to like get to like go back to the paper. But if I'm being frank, like it was not as like drastic as like you might think. So there like were cases, and I'm trying to remember if it was at like the higher or lower levels, but there were cases where yes, like the transition probabilities were higher. But then there were also cases where like, and this could just be like, error, like rounding errors and stuff like that, where like it made no difference or might have been even like slightly worse.
Yeah, just asking for a
That
friend
makes sense.
in case,
Yeah.
I want to relive my baseball dream. Should I start juicing?
Well, that kind of makes sense given like our conversations around PEDs in the Hall of Fame, right? And just saying it can't just because you're on a performance enhancing drug doesn't mean you can suddenly hit the ball. It's just going to maybe mean that you hit it better, right?
Yeah, and the recovery times are better and that sort of stuff. That was I had like a
Yeah, but if you
two-part.
suck at baseball and
Yeah, yeah,
I'm just
yeah.
posing this for someone we might know, but like
Why'd
let's
you
say
say
you're not
you and then
great.
look straight at
I'm
me in the
just
eyes?
throwing it out there. If there's someone we know who like
If your
wanted to
name's
relive his
Anthony and your
dream,
ass, it's
if your
like,
name is
damn.
Anthony and you used to play ball, taking PEDs isn't suddenly going to make you a major league star,
Say what
right?
you
There's
want. I
still a
think it
lot
would
of other
have.
things.
I was pretty close without it.
I thought it was interesting that you bring up how the team aspect of it all, because that was something I was thinking too. Like, you know, I'm assuming because I'm not part of Sabre, I don't know, my invitation must have gotten lost in the mail, but I'm assuming that there is a disincentive for the league to promote performance using athletes, but at the same time, they can be better at the game. So I wonder if that's necessarily always true and a given. And this is coming from potentially an ignorant stance.
Yeah. So like, I mean, this is certainly not something that I think this paper would cover. So I'll just caveat that. Uh, I think there is like a lot of literature on, you know, is deterring PED use like really like optimal? Um,
Right.
Certainly from like the health aspects of the game, like yes, like you don't want your players like completely destroying their bodies, trying to get promoted to the higher levels. Um, I think there's also like competitive balance. Of course, there's like competitive balance concerns, meaning like you don't want teams or particular players to have like undue unfair advantage. Um, and so I think like from most of the players' perspectives, I think that they probably would want PED use deterred, just because if PED use were allowed, it kind of creates like a bad incentive where like, okay, if it's legal, then pretty much everybody would probably use it in order to alter those probabilities to kind of all be on the same level. And that of course comes to the detriment of their health. Um, so that's my personal stance on it. Uh, Now, of course, like I'm not like completely ignorant. Like I'm on Twitter and I see people being like, "Oh, this shit is so boring. Let's go back to the PED era." But like, you know, I think players' health is also important.
Nah, nah.
That's fair.
We want to see
That's nice of
500
you.
foot bombs. We want to see the ball never land. Uh, I mean, that's really off the top of my head. Everything that I had, like, that just, I was like, I want to know more about this, know more about that. Um, where does this rank in terms of your projects that you've done? Do you have like a ranking, kind of like trophies on a wall, like accomplishments and things you've worked on, like where does this sit for that? Because this, I think this is pretty sweet.
I mean, this is definitely probably. I think this is my favorite to be, if I'm being completely frank, in terms of like the sports analytics topics that I've written on. Um, just because like I think the model, like the structural model itself, like while it's like very notation heavy and a bit mouthy, um, I think it's actually like at its core like a pretty simple cost benefit analysis. And I kind of always have appreciated when economists can, take very complex uh, problems and kind of formalize them in these, simple two-period models. I think there's kind of a beauty in that. And while, of course, like there's a lot of caveats you have to put with them, um, I think one, oftentimes the simpler the better, and it gets close enough. And also, I think it's important for getting, the more businessy like front office types to kind of understand, you know, how they can evaluate their own PED policies.
Now, you mentioned simplicity, and I'm gonna text you guys a picture of a graph, and I'm gonna show this on the screen too for the viewers. This is a graph that Levi drew for me one late night when we were pondering the cosmos of baseball and economics of baseball and PED use in the minor leagues. From my understanding,
I think that sums up what I just saw.
Yeah,
that's a
dude,
perfect example.
This was a very late night graph, and I think he did a great job because he broke it. This is talk about simplicity.
I see no difference
Dude,
between what I'm looking at.
Can you just sum up what this is, Levi, on this graph?
This was honestly just me trying to explain the wage curves, because I remember you being like, oh, there's no way, like, if the wage curves were like steeper, you would want that. And then I was trying to just explain like why it's important to flatten the wage curves.
I was saying pretty much, dude, you're telling me that like
these are awful graphs though.
Yeah, no, this is great. I was like, if you're gonna pay me more, of course I'm gonna take steroids, and that's exactly what he pointed out. He's like, yeah, imagine you're an A ball getting paid nothing, and if you take steroids and get promoted to AAA, you're gonna see a way larger increase than if the slope was more, flat, which makes sense. Yeah.
I mean, I do think it is sad though. Like, you would expect a higher curve in income when you start playing at higher levels. So I do think that is unfortunate. I understand, to your point of PED use, why you would want that leveled out, but as a player, I'm sure that probably doesn't feel as great.
Well, I also asked him this too. I said the slope goes from steep to flat. Now I asked him, does that mean they just lowered the AAA wages down, or did they bring the single A up? And
right.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, cool.
I think
I would assume they just brought everyone down, because that's
No, I think what Levi actually talked about too is like the CBA. They're actually doing more for minor leaguers now too, which is probably definitely contributing to the
and the key
decrease.
Like the key with the curve is that it's all indexed to the rookie ball, and so you can have like the 2023 pay schedule that I showed you guys. Like, you can flatten the curve and significantly increase everybody else's salaries. And in fact, like in our model, like that's optimal. And I think all the players would especially be appreciative of that. I think actually this is kind of a tangent, but
we love
one
those
thing that this
on
really,
this show.
Well, one thing that this really like, I knew minor league baseball players, like their base wages were not that great, but it really does put it into perspective, where it's like a guy who's a AAA ball player who realistically is on the margin of probably being on a 40-man roster, right? Like, is there really, like, I have the most respect for guys on 40-man rosters, but realistically, there's probably a minuscule difference in the abilities or the performance of a guy on a AAA roster versus the guy on a 40-man roster. And the base wage of a guy in AAA is around $35,000 a year. So that's just like, it's unbelievable how just like little they get paid for how talented they are.
And it makes sense, like when you see dudes like Blake Snell and Matt Chapman, Jordan Montgomery, when they finally get, I mean, some of these dudes, they sign in the draft and get $1 million signing bonus, but it's a very small percentage of the actual minor leaguers that get that. So it makes sense when you get a guy who has enough big league service time to hit free agency, he's going to try to go after that bag and get paid.
Totally.
So, well, sweet. Thanks, Levi, for sharing us the carrot and the stick, dude. I was excited for this. We've been in the works trying to get this set up, and I'm excited for Friday, March 8th, when you get to go out there. I hope they live stream it so I can watch it a second time.
Tell me what you're drinking, we can go pour one. Tell me what you're thinking, we can have some more fun. I know that you said you don't think of me, but what you're doing now is telling different. Tell me what you're drinking, we can go pour one. Tell me what you're thinking, we can have some more fun. I know that you said you don't think of me, but what you're doing now is telling different.